Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the Man at YouTube with another honing your airbrush skills. The past few videos have been all about maintenance and repairing and cleaning and whatnot. We really need to get back into painting. So we shall do a resin garage kit special and paint this whole kit using different and probably some unusual methods associated with garage kits and figure painting. So even though the kit is pretty genius and well done, there is a lot of parts and components, and there is a certain way that I do want to colour it and not in the same colour as presented in the picture. I'd like to do my own colour scheme. So pretty much each colour is not going to be a flat colour. We will be doing some modulation, at least 2 colours. There will also be a lot of masking, particularly Tamiya mask. We'll probably try the SMS mask, and I've also got the new curve tape, masking tape, to try out. So far some parts have had a liquid mask at the joints where parts are going to glue together or stick together. I've found with resin, post-assembly is really tough. When you're pinning and assembling, you have to make sure that the model can hold its own weight together and be nice and tight fitted with the pins and dry assembled and stand freely, so when you glue it together later it'll still stand freely. And it's also good for some areas not to be glued, period, so it can be dismantled and stored at a later time and not just completely assembled, that I've learned from other videos and modelers. So I've spent a lot of time surface preparing and just repinning and adding extra pins to the point where this can stand on its own. Looking at the video that will review this kit as well as some pictures on Facebook, you'll see that this was a process over a few months, though it's not going to run into the same problems I had with the Hatsune Miku resin kit a while ago. So with a kit this complex, preparation is absolute king and god, more or less. What we will do now, after we've done other preparation, the resin was washed in warm soapy water to remove the release agent. Each surface has been sanded thoroughly and polished and re-washed. I always suggest re-washing it. The reason why we want to do this is there's contaminants on the surface. That's the release agent in casting resin. And if there's any grease or whatever and you apply paint, the grease is going to stick out, the paint's going to run off, and there's going to be spots all over that's going to show bare resin. This is known as fisheye, and we have avoided this by sanding and washing. What I will do after all the putty, sanding, assembling, I will apply some Tamiya primer. We're going to have a look for any last imperfections, a last chance, and this is also the first foundation of primer onto resin for a good stick of paint. And then we'll go from there, go to base coating, acrylic clear, mask, base coat, acrylic clear, mask, and some parts will require many layers of masking. A good trick I've learned: if you got some incense, you light it in front of your extractor booth, and if it gets sucked straight in, your extractor booth is working. Doesn't seem to be the case, so we're going to have to do a bit of cleaning. This might explain everything. It's pretty gunked. Now I'm guessing it's meant to work like that, so let's clean it. Now that is a lot better flow. So you can see that it's going somewhere in the centre. I'm going to go closer. It just goes straight in there. So when I'm painting and the fumes go right up against my corrugated cardboard, it's being sucked in by the filter and not just backlashing and hitting me back in the face. I'm going to have to clean the filter out more often, but this is a learning curve for me. Fuck. Anyway, yeah, I like some incense in the studio from time to time, and it has a good use in making sure that your extractor booth is well maintained. I'll probably cover this in a video again, but yeah, very cool concept. When I pull back far away when it's out of range, you can see the smoke just goes straight up. When you get close, it goes forward and it gets sucked in. So the first thing we're going to experiment is a new type of shot glass we did in the last video. We used the Red Cups, Red Cup brand, big thing in America. These ones do not work very well. So I'm going to put a bit of primer and thinner into this one, and we'll see if the arse falls out. So here we go. It feels a lot more rigid, and it's a lot harder and thicker than the Red Cup. So it should work. You can see how the paint is slightly transparent through the clear glass, so it's a good mix. And it slides back down. It's actually very easy to judge the mix. We'll do a test spray. So I have to get used to leaning in further when I'm spraying, so I'm not getting a backlash of fumes. So going nice and deep in the booth, and I'm just dusting on. You can see how it's a bit transparent. You can still see the white, you can still see the yellow. The coat is nice and wet. I've probably done about 2 part thinner to 1 part primer. That way we're not going to get orange peel, we're not going to get any weird effects. No imperfections. It's going to go on nice and smooth. And then, when you want it to be nice and glossy, you build it on, you cake it on until it looks nice and slick and shiny and glossy. And that way, we can get a beautiful, either flawless finish or a gloss coat finish. And that is your wet effect. You need to dust it on first, get a bit of teeth in it, because a thick amount of paint will just not sit on the surface. When we know it gels, it fits. It's going to take on a thicker coat. We'll demonstrate this again. Just little dusts, dusting it on. And because we're dusting on, there is a bit of overspray. You do see a few speckles in the finish. And then you just go nice and hard and balls to the wall. And we've just run out of primer. Just because I ran out of primer before I could do the wet coat, you can actually see the intensity of a dust coat and a wet coat. And you can see how one is a solid primer colour and one is just really, really pale and half white, half not white. So these pieces came out quite nice. Very, very happy. 1-2 areas, there is a tiny speckle of dust that's settled here and there during the wet coat. That's not a big deal. I can quite easily cover that by doing a very, very light 2000 grit buff wet once it's fully hardened. So we can do that before the flesh goes on. The cups seem to have worked quite well. Even though I split it down the side, the bottom will not fall out, so I'm pretty happy about that. So it's really, really strong. Too easy. After painting most of the model, shot glass is working. And what I want to demonstrate is when we've got liquid mask or a mask, and I do not want to paint the top bit because that's where resin's going to insert on resin. When we colour in the piece, we do not have to solidly colour that area. So when we colour and we're dusting, in theory, we could still keep the yellow bit yellow. And then when you get a bit of paint on, you let it rest. And you may paint multiple parts while it's resting, because the coat is still wet. Bit of bubble jet. So it's giving, it's got a little paint that's sitting on the resin. It's getting the chance to bite in, to eat in, to set on it. And once it's dried and hardened, you can add a little more primer, and then go full wet coat. And we can still keep the yellow bit nice and yellow. So that is 2 really thin dust coats, and now we can go for a wet coat. Everything is nice and smooth, it's nice and thick. Later on we can buff it, we can sand it, we can do whatever. It'll stay at primer. But now, since it's a primed painted surface, whatever paint that goes on top, it'll just stick on like any other model kit. So it's not a problem. Every other coat after this can be really thin. I've primed everything in Tamiya primer, and it's just occurred to me the reason why I struggled a bit, that Tamiya primer doesn't like resin that much, to the reason why we needed to bite a bit and then spray more. I do recommend more that you use Mr. Hobby Surfacer. They attach on primer, or they attach to resin so much better. Unfortunately, working on a few resin projects, I'm completely out of that and had to use Tamiya. It fish eyes really easily. It doesn't mean that your resin isn't properly treated. It's just the resin doesn't really like it, or the primer doesn't like the resin that much. So please excuse me for using that. I do use what I have around the studio. But everything is on. It's nicely applied. It's definitely well stuck and well etched into the material. We're going straight into painting. Now, colour modulation. When painting a lot of stuff, painting black. Black is a really absorbent colour. It stands out. If you want to shade something, you can't paint anything darker than black. So you should look for other dark colours to represent black and then shade further with black. I found German grey and this khaki colour. I'm doing the other tones of the skirt to do a kilt in tartan scheme. And we will start with this undercoat colour. Some other clothing that's going to be heavily masked, a lanchkinette sort of colour separation of yellow and again black. I've got this range, everything we painted yellow, and the top and bottom will be shaded with Middlestone and tan for colour effect. So we've got the khaki colour, and I'm just going to ever so lightly dust it on, and I'm going in every angle to get every possible direction. Again, just dust on, multiple coats, and then we go for a wet coat. And it sits a lot more beautifully because it's sitting on the prime surface and not bare resin. So now everything is a lot easier to spray without any drama. So we're going for the wet coat now. It's building up. Instead of being all gritty and grimy, it's becoming wet and a solid colour. There's no more lumps or bumps or anything, no orange peel. And there you go. What we're going to do is going to shade the pleats and the curves and whatnot with German grey really lightly. We're going to thin that super neatly, so even at a light amount, it's going to be fairly wet, and we might do the bottom touch-ups in black. So we've got the German grey. So we got this sort of colour, but I'm only going to be spraying this light. So you can see that there's this difference in tone, and even something as light as that. And what we're going to do is at the bottom, wet coat the underneath areas, and then we just start painting in the pleats. And the folds. Then you pull back and you paint just the bottom areas. All in the folds and everywhere. Then you pull back and you dust. And you want to have the bottom bits little darkness to it. And there you go. You got a lot of colour variation. Build up in some of the heavy creases. And then away you go. That's got a lot of variation to it.
Yes, to see if the product is right.
So we've got SMS
your expectations are high, and before you
black,
it's not.
even though I got primer on the bottle,
You need a mate. Your real estate
and it's heavily thin, so we want to build it up slowly.
And an investor. Richard will work out what went wrong.
We've got our lovely kilts going.
You'll even get mates rates on his commission. Well, that's what mates are for. You need to call
Colour in the bottom.
You'll be
Bubble jets a bit, and all we're doing is highlighting in between the pleats. Nothing else.
There are bad days.
And that's all. That's all we're doing. And it just gives another dimension of colour.
Work safe inspection.
So for the second part, we're just going to paint it in yellow. Now I'm using the SMS yellow because it's just got an absolute amazing pigment density. Yellow is a bit of a pain to paint, but this one only needs a couple of passes, and then straight on that we can start shading like crazy. So you can see just once around, it's all good. Then we'll just chuck a couple of more wet coats. I'm not going too thick on the masked areas or the other areas that are going to be painted, not to flood the detail out. And that's it. So it's going to be standing like that, and we'll just do a little shading on the top and the bottom. So I've got some middle stone in the airbrush, and we've got some yellow here, I've got some middle stone, and you can see the big difference in tone of colour. So we'll pull back. What we're going to do is with just one leg, if it's standing up here, we're going to shade. We're just going to delicately dust on from afar the top bit. And it's just going to be a gradual change of colour. And then you go a bit stronger along the edge. And then you can see it's very, very subtle. I'll zoom in. It's very subtle, but it just gives it colour variation. And with the tan, we're just going to paint the top up there. And so it's going to be like a brownish yellow, sort of stained, dirtied. Now, what we're going to do is with a lighter colour, we're just only ever so lightly highlighting the top. Just a little ring. Like that. That is it. Just a change in colour. And we will zoom in for that. and then we've got a nice variance. So it looks really, really, really interesting. So this is my rendition of black. Now you can see all together, even though it's a green, it's a grey, it's black, it actually looks like black, and there's multiple tones. And that worked really, really well. That was a good method taught to me by Mark Carlisle, who's the current Gunpla, or the past Gunpla Builders World Cup champion. And we've got the yellow leg, and you can see that it looks yellow, but there's just a bit of shading and just slight different colour variation. It pops and it looks like a thigh. And same here, you can see the definition of the breasts a lot more, even though there's just different types of browns blended with this base coat of yellow. So it's popped up nicely. What we're going to do is clear coat those two so we can put masking on them in a very short period of time, and then put more paint on top. So we've got some future floor finish, or you can do 2 parts acrylic to 1 part Tamiya clear, or 3 parts methylated spirits to 1 part clear floor polish. And we just give this a royal wet coat where it's all nice and shiny, slick, no orange peel. Second coat if needed. And why we do this is when we put the masking tape on, in the event that the masking goes wrong and it lifts paint or damages paint, it's going to damage the clear, and the clear can be sanded back down to paint without damaging the paint, or the clear is just going to be lifted and it's going to leave the paint. Now, to be safe, we're going to allow the maximum amount of time for both the lacquer and the acrylic to dry. So I would leave it 24 hours or more, and then you apply the mask, and then you put more paint on it. Make sure it's nice and hard to the touch. If there's weather conditions, really cold, really hot, really humid, wait even longer. And there we go, and that's a nice wet coat, 2 coats, quite easy. So just a quick update, we've masked the dress as well as the outfit, and we've done some buffing and sanding of some parts to get rid of imperfections and whatnot. We'll start applying some more paint. It's about here, here and here we've got the missing primer, and this time I've got Mr. Surfacer 1500, and it's just as simple as just colouring in those little areas. Nothing too hard, even though it's a different brand of primer. The colour chips is exactly the same. That's it, nothing else to it. Now, the dark brown bits on this base was painted strategically by hand using Tamiya's soil texture effect. Because texture doesn't come out too well in resin, doesn't matter who makes or casts the resin, I've taken to the liberty of adding extra detail and making a bit more exciting. When you put more primer on it, it makes more sense of how good it's going to look when it's painted up and washed and weathered. So we're going to paint on some masked surfaces. You want the paint to be nice and thin. And what we're doing is we've got some Tamiya masking tape in half points, and then we've got some blue tack. And what we're going to do is hold it at a slight angle, and with our medium colour we're just going to dust on. And the reason why we're spraying on a slight angle is to prevent paint going underneath the mask. And we did the same on the other side, the back bit. And then once that's done, we colour everything in, and then we do a wet coat. Make sure you're getting all the nook and crannies. And there you go. Nice half painted. Gonna do the highlights like the other black things were painted. Now what we have here is a part of the skirts, and we've used Tamiya curve type 2mm tape, and it's contoured around really nicely. Big fan of this tape so far. I applied SMS clear mats just in case there's any gaps, so it's going to prevent any bleeding. If there's any bleed, it's going to be a bleed of clear paint. And what we're going to do is we're just right dead on. We're just going to dust on the paint for a few coats. And then we'll slowly build up until the colour is to our satisfaction. We do not have to rush because I do not want to get any paint under the mask. And if there's any gaps that we miss because there's a crease, it's already a black colour underneath, so it doesn't matter too much. I'm also starting with the darkest colour because if there is any bleed, it's going to be a dark colour and not a light colour. And just make sure that your airbrush is situated right on top of the mask. Go for a bit of a wet coat, and then the rest will be shaded on. And there you go. Too easy. So we've shaded a bit of red on top of the brown, and we're going to use a brighter red, and we're just only ever so lightly dusting on and then building up to the top, and we're just getting into the folds and whatnot, so it's just got a real nice highlight. Tilt it, dust a bit more, and then we go intense on the top. And you can see that there's a bit of variation. And last on the dress, we've got little highlights, and we're just going to highlight the very bottom, so it's just not as drab. And we shall just lightly pick up the top like that, and we've got all sorts of tones and colours. Looks quite interesting. So the mask, the blue tuck's not too bad. The lines are a bit soft and jagged, and for a hard line obviously you go for masking tape, but the two together is not too bad at all. And there you go, an absolute perfect specimen. Don't mind about that, that's being painted silver. Very happy about that. We'll start doing the shoulders and whatnot. So I've used normal masking tape, or normal modelling masking tape on the tartan skirt, and it is the Aizu brand from Japan, micro tape 0.7mm. When doing tartan, it's advised for every line to use different thicknesses, and it just gives that little more depth of a tartan cloth. Now some of the creases the tape hasn't stuck too well and the paint's going to bleed underneath. That's okay, it can be shaded a little later and it creates the effect of folds and whatnot. So we'll see when it's all lifted. So what we did was we dusted on clear matte to seal the mask, yellow, a light brown, then a dark brown in the folds, and some sort of tan colour at the top to give it variation. Looks alright, can't wait to lift the masks. So now we're going to go to flesh. I've got Gaia Note Surface Evo Flesh Colour. I use that as a flesh primer to give it a good base coat, and then we layer multiple layers of flesh, using the Mr. Hobby Bones Beautiful Girl colour set, and then highlights of Character Flesh, and it gives it a lot of interesting tones, and it doesn't look as dull or drab as grey primer. And all you have to do is just dust it on, nice wet coat. Be generous, a nice thick coat of the primer. Hides any imperfections or anything. There's a bit of there is a bit of micro filler in it. Make sure it's all nice and glossy and good looking, but not too much that it starts to droop. There you go. Flesh priming. Now, the Mr. Beautiful Girl colour comes with 4 colours. 2 of them are base coats or blushes. 2 of them are highlights. Now, before you get scared or are concerned on how to use it, it comes with a handy blush guide, and then you can always use the Character Flesh to make it more pale, I suppose. So you need to use either 2 or 4 as your base, and 1 and 3 is the highlights. So I'm probably going to use the bright orange, and then I might use something else. So we'll see how we go, and we will shade it on. So we've got our beautiful primer on, and we don't see any bumps or whatever, and it's beautifully glossy. And then we just colour it in with our blush, and it becomes a nice bright pink, which may look a bit too much, but that's okay. We've got another step to follow. You could also use this straight on primer, because this is also somewhat of a base coat. So we've got the next colour loaded up. We've got the pink, and you've got this really nice peachy flesh, and it just complements each other. And what our goal is instead of painting in every crevice, we're only going to face on, and then you're just going to colour in straight, leaving some pink borders under armpits and other areas that are just undercoated or undercover. And then you pull back and you just shade. And then you just build up in the flat areas. Shade how you would find it to be appropriate. And we've got one more colour to shade as well, so it's not a big risk. That looks alright. It's a bit tannish, but we will fix that in the next coat. Now, extra thin. So we're talking about like 2 parts thinner to 1 part paint. We're using Character Flesh 1. It's really, really pale. Our figure is still quite pinkish. And what we're going to do is just in some high parts, is just dust on a bit of white, and you just keep doing it until you get the tone you want. Or you can dust the whole thing lightly and just lighten or whiten the skin. And you can get a nice pale look. And then you get something like that. You can see the pinks in all the corners and nooks and crannies, and it starts getting peach around the folds of the midriff, around the thighs and the pinches and the back mark. and the pale just really brings it together and just makes it look like it's a lot lighter skin than it is. You can also play with tone. I've got the face and the top of the shoulders really pale, like it's quite light and white, and then I've got down the back, the armpits, the torso and the legs a bit more pinker, like it's darker, casting a shadow. I haven't done this before, but I thought it would look interesting. I did a very similar technique, but used the other colour set for this miniature. So it gives you an idea what it looks like when it's quite finished, and when it's very fleshy. So with the masks removed, the skirts came out very nice. Quite happy with it. We'll give it a gloss coat and then dull it later. So we have a lot going on here. Probably the most obvious bit, the legs and midriff. The panties were hand painted, dusted a bit of flesh, dusted a bit of red, and then re-hand painted just for that look that it sort of just blends in. When I hand painted it looked kind of shit. The eyes were hand painted white, decals put in. They were just ever so little more than 1 millimeter short, so I dusted some paint underneath it to close the gap a bit. And probably the most hard worked at part in the whole kit, the torso. The flesh is there. We hand painted and dusted on the leather work. And we still got one more round of masking to do the skirt in metal. So that's going to be quite interesting. So we're going to do the hair. Now I want brunette, black hair. Painting it all black with painting anything all black is problematic. I will give it a black base coat, but I'm going to highlight various colours. I'm thinking going to a blue tinge. So we'll mix black and blue, and then we'll give the highlights at the top of the hair and some other areas very light strands of blue. So it's just an easy case chance of colouring it in, dusting it on everywhere you need to go. I'm going for a wet coat to make it nice and fast. Doesn't matter if it's a bit thick, as long as it goes on nice and smooth. So when we dull coat it, it's not going to have any bumps or lumps or any ugly detail. And being the base coat, it's important to cover every area. So you want to twist every area and get every bit of grey primer. I've just run out of paint. So I finished painting the hair, and I mixed this colour, which is 50-50 black and the dark blue, and I shaded that. I shaded the dark blue in the higher points around there, the top of the head and raised bits along there, and then with a slightly lighter blue, just a band here, just a crop on top of the head and the band across there. It sort of gives it that old 90s look, which I'm kind of fond of. And it works out quite well, finished by a heavy gloss coat for protection. This was painted dark brown and then shaded with a lighter brown. The stitching was painted in a light brown freehanded and then shaded with a cream colour. With the handle, that was painted black, shaded with brown. Everything else was hand painted. It will be neatened up with a wash. Both sealed in clear gloss. So the base is painted. I hand painted all the major components and then just dusted multiple different colours of browns and rusts and whatnot all over the place to blend it in, yet for the swords and the chrysanthemum to sort of stand out. It's going to receive a few coats of wash and a top coat and static grass, and it's going to be like a ruins. These weapons and whatnot's been laying around for a very long time, and it's just being trampled on and grass growing through it. So it should be an interesting feature when done. Looks a bit weird now, but should make more sense when the grass is applied. So we have masked these components off. At the very top round corner bit is the SMS liquid mask. The rest is just Tamiya paint. Going to paint it face on, and then it's going to even be masked further to paint just the metal. So masked those two bits, painted everything in dark brown, highlighted with light brown, a little bit of shading with black, and a very heavy coat of clear for further masking. So that's all the leather bits done. all we got left is armour. So I've got these components completely masked, and fun tip, I've actually run out of tin masking. Everything's primed and ready to start painting the armour. I'm going to do a non-metallic version first, and then we're going to do a salt weather chip method, and then metallic it. Again, modulation sets are very easy to come by. Don't read the labels, look at the caps or the tops, and make a decision off that. So we've got the undercoat done, and we've got a clear coat. We're going to wait for a bit, apply some hairspray, salt, dry that a bit, and then paint our top coat. So we're going to make some decals. I've got clear decal paper with nothing on it, offcuts from Samuel. Got a circle template, and I've got everything taped up but one circle. And just as a test, spray on the rear ends. Hold it down nice and flat. Spraying it right on top. Lift. Perfect. Circle. So we can actually do it on the decal. Line it up. Spray. Lift. Perfect circle. And I'm going to have 3 circles somewhere on this thing. So what I've done now is I covered each of the pieces with hairspray, extra hold, name brand, and sprinkled rock salt on top of it. I'm going to apply some more paint, and after it dries the salt will chip off and will mask off the paint underneath and show chipping effect. It's just going to be a slight colour variation to what I'm going to put over, and it's going to give it a pitted look, so that should be quite interesting. The armour will be very heavily weathered using methods that I know about. Okay, since I sprayed the silver on and removed the salt, it created a nice pitted surface. Afterwards, a tiny amount of brown, burnt iron, followed by a candy coat of clear brown, and created a very realistic pitted surface. So it's quite realistic to say this is what spring steel or carbon steel would look like in the element not too well maintained, or at least partially maintained, going through rain, storage, all that sort of stuff. The shins have the most heaviest of rust, where it almost blends into leather, and all the leather has a bit of dirt, so it's almost the metal and the leather almost becomes the same colour. These are observations I made in reenactment and LARP circles, so it's giving a bit of anecdotal evidence of reference material, as well as looking at my own equipment. So this is quite interesting. It's been a lot of fun. There still needs to be washes and whatnot. I need to sort out parts that are done, needs a wash and a top coat, and parts that still need a lot more hand painting and maybe masking and even more airbrushing. So this is an update for honing your airbrush. We've masked the final pieces for our project, and then the rest of it's just going to be hand painting. Everything else is lined up here. The metal came out quite nice, so all of the pieces on that big stand needs hand painting. These pieces are done, a little washing and top coat, and these are the last to be airbrushed. A few hours ago, all the metal bits has been given a sludge wash of black and a medium brown colour. It's an oil wash, so it stays wet, and when you spray on it, it sort of rushes around to make it at least in a state where it's not liquid. I've given it about 3-4 hours, and we shall apply SMS lacquer matte to matte some of the bits that are just inappropriate to be shiny, like the flesh. Give it a couple of coats, might dust on a bit of gloss on the metal bits, and we are finished, ready to pack and send. When all is said and done, everything is completed, I allow all the base paints and the washes and whatnot a decent amount of time to dry before the first test assembly. In this case, competition, I allowed less than 24 hours. Normally I'll not touch any of the pieces for a few days to allow it to fully chemically harden, not chip as it touch other pieces or scratch, lift, whatever. With the finish, I find with the oils they take a long time to dry. When I apply matte clear on it, it sort of sits on the wet pooled panel line areas and frosts there because it just combines and builds up, mixes with the wash and just becomes completely white. That's a bit of a pain. Or it pushes it around and does some sort of damage to the surface. So any washes, inks you apply for panel lines or sludge deta, allow it to completely harden, completely dry. Again, that could take up to 24 hours. Apply your top coat, allow that a few days to dry on resin, and this is Resin Projects at the moment. Let it completely harden, and when it's nice and hardened and dry and ready to be touched, you could do your assembly and it will look pretty good. Not a problem at all. And that's pretty much the whole video, my take on attempting resin kits, figures, anything that is more than updating parts and requires assembly for color separation or whatnot. Glue has rarely been used after painting due to how long the pegs are. It just holds itself together and it's easy enough to transport, disassemble and pack up. So that is pretty good in itself, and when I wish no longer to display it or take it to a competition, which I am, and I've successfully taken it that competition back and put on my shelf for display, no damage has occurred, no fragile bits broken or anything, and with all the hair follicles and whatnot, that is pretty good in my opinion. This is the conclusion of painting the E2046 Garage Resin Kit. I would like to thank E2046 for giving me this model in return of making tutorials and helping people and introducing people how to build resin model kits and get familiar with their brand and other type of resin and garage kits. Brings awareness, and people who otherwise would not buy their products or other products will hopefully do so in seeing that it's not as hard as it appears to be, especially compared to snapped Gundam kits or styrene kits. It's a completely different set of skills, and there's nothing hard to it. Just buy the right tools. Pardon me. Buy the right tools, follow the rough guides, and you should be completely fine. In the way of painting and airbrushing, it's very similar to painting and airbrush any other models. Drilling holes into places they're going to be glued or assembled where it's not going to be seen. You can drill really large holes and put your alligator clips in there or pegs of blue tack to mount your parts on skewers and airbrush it. It makes it so much easier. You would have seen in every picture and everything that I talked that each piece was always on a skewer. I never had to lay it on something flat and flip it and paint it. That would make shading and other things pretty difficult, and doing that to my Miku, not mounting all the pieces, that was just really difficult, and I don't think I'll be doing that again. In the way of airbrushing, everything in this video is subjective. It is my style. These are honing your airbrush skills videos are more experimental in nature, and I try something new every time. Some things I carry on and repeat, some things I don't repeat. I was pretty happy with all the results that happened here, and the figure came out at a pretty good level. Critiquing or self-critiquing as well as critiques from other people. I could have done the flesh blushing a lot more intensely. The colours do, as well as the realism of the rust and the metal, conflict and contrast. So there's all this contrasting loud colours of a medieval armoured being on a field, but the flesh does not quite match that. It's a bit washed out, which anime characters of later generations tend to be very washy, single-toned, dual-toned when they're in bathing suits or playing high school uniforms or clothing. Since I was going for something completely different, it wasn't just a upbeat toned, flat, no shaded paint job, The flesh was looked at from a modern anime perspective, and that just kind of washed out and looks a bit plain in photos and arguably in person as well. But that's not too much of a problem. That's more of an artistic direction. The way of where I masked ends off and whatnot, it was able to be assembled quite well. Again, the pegs worked out quite well, and comparing to the assembly of two other resin kits, which you guys are probably thinking why I'm talking about assembly. Assembly is very important for resin, and it's very difficult to do, and being rushed at the final end can ruin the paintwork, and it goes hand in hand. I actually learnt from a lot from MVM Matt Mosaic, who is a very well-known and renowned resin painter, and recently getting into garage kits, and was able to pick up a few tips on patience and taking your time. So that's the biggest thing I'm taking away from this build, is after it's painted, you're at the very end, the model's just about finished. Do not assemble, rush the assembly bit. That will make or break your model and all the hard work that's been put into it. Also, don't forget to regularly practice airbrushing once a month. Regular maintenance will prevent overspray and your airbrush not performing at its best performance. Regularly cleaning, regularly swiping out. Older, cheaper airbrushes like your Hyacins, you can do your soaking, your ultrasonic cleaning. Your high-end airbrushes only need a really good clean out. And that's about it. Lubricate the rear end, and it is all good. Keep practicing those lines. Play at home, please. If you have any questions, put it in the comment section, direct message, whatever. Very happy to help out. And that concludes this video. Also, be mindful of your health with extractor booths, masks, and breathing in paint fumes. It may not do much in the short end. The long end, it can give you health issues. Model into a very old age and live for a long time. Don't get any illnesses from your hobby, especially under my tutorage. We should all look after our health, regardless at what stage of your life and mindset you're at. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. I might hold off on the airbrushing content for a little while. I've done a lot of airbrush reviews and whatnot, so I might not do a video till January and focus on some other aspects. I have Facebook, where I post very regularly updates, builds, videos, everything. So if anything ever happens on YouTube, like you lost subscription to me or something, that seems to be an issue at the moment. Facebook is where everything is always posted to, link down below. Twitch, I'm twitching semi-regularly. Patreon, bit of a tip jar, and that's about it. Catch you guys next time, and keep airbrushing.